Okay, let's talk about the male reproductive system and sort of finish this section off on the reproductive system, and let's go ahead and start here. A couple things about the male reproductive system before we get started is we talked about how females they're born with a certain set number of ovum. Okay, however, males can produce and release billions of spermatozoa during the course of their lifetime. This starts just after puberty, when all of a sudden testosterone gets things in the testes working and spermatozoa production begins. Again, for this could continue for the rest of life. I'm not saying that the spermatozoa in a 95-year-old guy is going to be the same as the spermatozoa in a 21-year-old guy, because what happens is the production does go down. The success for production in regards to making viable spermatozoa as well as motile spermatozoa does decrease. Okay, but it is still possible throughout a lifetime. The male hormone is testosterone, as we probably all know by now, by this time, and testosterone is really important because what it's from the male gonad, which is the testicle. That's where it's produced. There's also a little bit of testosterone that's produced in the adrenal gland. Okay, but what it does is the testosterone also helps to direct, besides spermatozoa production, it also helps to direct the development of male body characteristics, development of hair, muscle development, things like that are all underneath the influence and the stimulus of testosterone. Okay. And also other organs are affected by the testosterone as well, particularly like the prostate gland. Okay, prostate gland does have a significant effect because of the testosterone. As males get older, one of the things that sometimes happens with males is they get an enzyme gets activated. Sometimes by epigenetics, what will happen is a certain gene may remain dormant for a while and then for some reason gets activated or gets turned on, like a light switch, on or off, on or off. It could go both ways. Some genes get turned off, some genes get turned on underneath a certain stimulus. There's a gene that produces an enzyme called, it's a reductase enzyme, and actually converts testosterone to what's called dihydrotestosterone. And in the dihydrotestosterone, it's still a very potent testosterone, but the bad part about it is that it has a couple other connotations, a couple other effects. One effect is male pattern baldness. Males with the dihydrotestosterone or DHT, when those levels go up, they have a tendency to lose a lot of their hair pattern. Okay, so the middle hair, they have that little ring around the outside, that male pattern baldness. But probably more significant than the male pattern baldness with dihydrotestosterone is that there are receptors on the prostate gland. The prostate gland is only in males. Okay, and what happens is there are receptors on the surface of the prostate gland that actually are receptors for the dihydrotestosterone, and it actually causes the prostate gland to get bigger, which becomes a significant problem in males as they get older. The reason why is as we're going to find out, that urethra that empties the bladder of the urine goes right through the center of the prostate, and as the prostate gets bigger, it starts to stretch out, but it also stretches in and squeezes on the urethra, which makes urination in males as they get older a little bit more difficult, because they have to go through a smaller urethral orifice, urethral tube, to be able to get out. Also, the seminal vesicles are involved, because the seminal vesicles are basically on the back side of the bladder, and the spermatozoa that are produced in the testes eventually go to the seminal vesicles for adding more fluid. So there's a number of other fluids and things like that that are secreted in various other places: the prostate gland, the seminal vesicles, the bulbourethral gland, which we'll all talk about here, which might be under the influence of testosterone. Again, the spermatozoa are really small cells. They're not very big at all. They're much smaller than a red blood cell. They're significantly smaller than an ovum. An ovum is really large. You got to remember that each month with ovulation, the female puts on a certain limited number of ovum, and even though they are large, they're still small in the overall universe of the fallopian tube. So therefore, the male spermatozoa still has to find that. That's why per each ejaculation, there's millions of spermatozoa per ejaculation, simply because the chances are that maybe one of those might find that very large ovum that's somewhere out there in that long tube called the fallopian tube. Okay, so they're significantly smaller than the female ovum, but many more are there. Okay, they have a couple parts to them. First of all, they have the head part is there, and that's where all the chromatid material is. What I mean by that is all the DNA genetic material is in the head portion. Okay, and that's what carries that genetic code from the dad to be able to mix with one half of each pair of chromosomes with one half of each pair of chromosomes from the mom the ovum. Okay, so that's the head. Also on the head, there's a little area that's on the top like a cap, and that cap has various types of enzymes. And what will happen is that when my spermatozoa sees an ovum, it starts to beat this head, the cap, against the ovum, and what happens? These enzymes are released, which make a weakening in the of the wall of the ovum, and the spermatozoa can enter and release that genetic material. So there's a fertilization which occurs. So there's the head. Okay, we also have the tail. The tail is called the flagellum. Now we've talked about flagellum earlier on when we were in the lab. Talked about the flagella. Actually, some people were looking at spermatozoa underneath the microscope, and basically the flagellum are important because what happens, they're like a whip-like tail. So you got to remember that spermatozoa are deposited in the vaginal vault. Plus, after that point, they have to swim through that cervical os, which we all know because we've gone through the female reproductive system, up that endocervical canal in the cervix, through the endometrial cavity, or the uterine cavity, and then out the fallopian tube to be able to meet the ovum in the area of the fallopian tube. The ovum, you got to remember, is just a single cell and is sort of tumbling and rolling down the fallopian tube wall with the aid of the cilia that are inside the fallopian tube. But they go a short distance as compared to the spermatozoa. They have to go a long way. So what happens is the spermatozoa need to be active. They need to be motile, and the way they're motile is that flagellum. And that's what they do when they actually do a sperm count for evaluating infertility. One thing they do is they not just look at the number of spermatozoa, but how many are actually swimming and moving. If there aren't very, they could have millions, but if they're not moving anywhere, guess what? They're not going anywhere. They're not making it up to the area of the fallopian tube. Also, another thing about spermatozoa, they carry very little food, okay, or very little cytoplasm. So they're basically running almost on empty, okay. So therefore, they only have a very short lifespan to be able to get from the area of the vaginal vault all the way up into the area of the fallopian tube, okay. So there is a time frame. They're not going to last forever. Eventually, they sort of run out of steam, and they're just not going to make it. So basically, that's another thing that's important. One of the things that happens is that the spermatozoa, when they're made in the testes, as they continue up this long course to be able to result in that ejaculation, that what happens is they're also added on top of it other types of fluids that might have a little bit of a medium for them to swim in, as well as some nutrients for a short period of time. Okay. Again, with each ejaculation, there's probably millions of spermatozoa that are ejaculated. However, are all of them good? Not only the number I mentioned, but how many are actually swimming or called motile, and also how many are actually normal looking. Some of them actually have two heads. They go in different directions. That's the one you want to stay away from. But what happens is we only have one spermatozoa that fertilizes one ovum. Okay. There are some things that are called chimeras. Okay, and we have maybe talked about it in a previous discussion, but chimeras are actually people they found that actually have two sets of DNA, and it's not because some people said, well, maybe there's two spermatozoa that fertilize an ovum. Seems unlikely, simply because each ovum only has one half of each pair of chromosomes, and one spermatozoa only has one half of each pair. What happened more likely is they had two spermatozoa. One fertilizes one ovum, one fertilizes the other ovum, and then what happens, they both result in that zygote, and the zygote starts to develop. However, one becomes more dominant and sort of overtakes the other, and now I have the second zygote be incorporated in the first, and so therefore there's similarities, but there's also a mixture of that DNA material, and these people are called chimeras. They didn't really understand that, and they didn't really notice that very well until the Innocence Project, where actually what they did is they started to look at the DNA patterns of people who were convicted for crimes who said, I didn't do it. And they started looking at Barry Sheff, who was on the O.J. Simpson case on the defense. Okay, he was one of these people that was involved with this Innocence Project. And what they did is they started to look at DNA and evaluate the DNA. And what they found out, some of these criminals actually had different types of DNA. They had mismatched DNA. Instead of having one DNA pattern, they had a couple. They had two, and they were called chimeras. But that's another story. It's sort of an interesting thing. Let's just look at some pictures. And again, this area up in here would be the head region. This would be that cap region that would be up in here. All the chromatid material would be in there. And this area right here, back here, is the flagella. So we can see the flagella back here, and the head here, head, flagella. Same thing here. Here's the head with all the chromatin material, and there's the flagella sitting right back in there. Okay, and again, they have to be motile. If you have a fresh spermatozoa specimen underneath the microscope, these little puppies are swimming all over the place. Okay, which is interesting. Let's talk about the male reproductive system and talk a little bit about what we have here organ-wise. Okay, the first thing that we have to probably start with is the penis. Okay, and the penis another thing that's interesting about the male reproductive system versus the female reproductive system is the female reproductive system and the urinary system are two separate systems. They're separated. There's no connection. In the male system, that's not true. They actually work by the same. They use some of the same equipment to be able to convey urine as well as spermatozoa, because all that is going to be coming out through the area of the penis. Okay. Anyway, so what happens is the penis allows the urethra to be able to come from the bladder. So here'd be the bladder up in here, and the urethra. Let me just draw it with a different color here. Let me draw it in a urethra is coming down this way, and then out through the end of the penis that way. So the urethra passes from the bladder out through the penis. Okay, but the thing that's different about the penis is that what happens, it's erectile tissue. Now if we look in here, see all this blue material in here, all this blue area? Okay, that's the erectile tissue. And what is erectile tissue? First of all, what it basically consists of are venous sinuses. There's open areas in there. And what happens is, what really causes this erection would be that these venous sinuses get filled with venous blood. And as a result, the penis will become stiffer because of all the venous blood that fills up inside these venous sinuses. Okay, and basically that's what we see with this erection. Interestingly enough, some of the most best-selling drugs in the United States are things like Viagra and Cialis. And Viagra is interesting because it actually started out as a cardiac medication for high blood pressure. And people were getting this medication for high blood pressure that was lowering their blood pressure, but they also noticed that when they were taking this medication, they were growing hair in areas that were a little thin. Okay, so the company that made this said, we're growing hair with this cardiac medication. Let's see if we could make another medication as a shoot off of this, and they did. Okay, and it became a very popular, very well-selling medication, both as a topical. They could rub it in as a topical as well as take it by orally. But what they also found was that it also, when they did that, another effect that occurred because of this medication was that it actually caused erections to be longer and more sustained. Okay, and so as a result, the guys that are making this hair medication said, hey, you know what, forget the hair stuff, let's just go on with this stuff for erectile dysfunction. And now you see like every third commercial on TV about erectile dysfunction, and that basically started out with some antihypertensive medications that were modified a couple ways to produce this. So that's what we talk about, that erectile tissue. The end of the penis, okay, the end of the penis is called the glans penis. And that's the area out here. It's sort of like the head area of the penis. It's called the glans penis, okay? And this is a little bit more sensitive distal region, distal tip. And at the end of it, we have the opening of the urethra, which is called the meatus. Meatus is just a word that means an opening. Like the urethra meatus in the female, is between the clitoris and the vaginal opening. In the male, it's at the very end of the penis. But a meatus just means an opening of something. We also have in the penis what's called the prepuce or the foreskin, okay, and that covers over the front or the glans penis area of the penis, okay, and this is the area that if it's chosen to be done, and it's perfectly a choice, not really a requirement, is circumcision. Okay, some religions require the circumcision, other ones say no, and it becomes a matter of choice. Okay, years ago, and many years ago, almost all males were circumcised, but nowadays some people take a choice. There are some advantages and disadvantages to both the circumcision as well as uncircumcised. One of the problems with uncircumcised male is that what happens is they have to make sure that they clean underneath that area of the prepuce or the foreskin, because if they don't, a lot of debris and garbage builds up in there, a little pasty like material, which then causes an irritation of the glans penis, which would be called a balanitis, because balano means glans penis, okay, causes a problem underneath there. And also as they get older, if they don't retract that to clean underneath there that much, the foreskin, the prepuce gets tighter, and if they do retract it, make it stuck, so it gets stuck, stuck back up in this area, just proximal to the glans penis, which then acts like rubber bands around the end of the penis, which causes a decrease in blood flow to the distal end, and that's a problem, okay? And that has to be surgically taken care of. Circumcision, they say with circumcision it may decrease sexual sensation, but I don't know, you know, how can you compare? Okay, most kids are circumcised before they even know what anything that like that is all about, so they wouldn't know one way or the other. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. So it's a situation where you know, I don't know if that's the case, but it's not medically necessary, but it's also not necessary. Okay, it's not, you know, prohibited or frowned upon. Okay, and again, we talked about the problem that we have with impotence, and impotence just means that a male would be unable to obtain or sustain an erection long enough to be able to allow deposition of spermatozoa in a vaginal vault. Okay, this is just another picture looking at the same thing we have here. So here's our bladder sitting up in here. Okay, and here's the urethra. Let me do it a different color here. Let's do it red. Okay, the urethra comes from the base of the bladder out this way, out through the area, the erectile tissue, and then out and eventually out through the end of the tip of the penis at the meatus. And again, the foreskin is called the prepuce on the outside. So basically, that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so that's the penis, the urethra, and the meatus, the prepuce, and all that stuff there. Okay, the testes. Okay, testes are similar in some ways to the ovaries, and the reason, one way that they're similar, is both of them start and have their origins in the abdomen. Okay, in the abdominal cavity. So in the fetus, the testes are still inside the abdominal cavity, and during the development of a fetus, the testes will actually migrate or work their way down through these canals in the lower abdominal wall called the inguinal canals. Okay, when guys get tested for a hernia, what they do, what the doc does, is they stick their finger up in that area of, they could feel the end of the inguinal canal. You feel a little hole that goes inside the abdomen, and through that hole goes what's called the spermatic cord. The spermatic cord has the vas deferens, or we'll talk about that as the tube that carries the spermatozoa from the testes into the abdomen. Okay, as well as nerves, arteries, veins that are fitting in this cord. And so the testes develop in the abdomen, and during gestation, which we all know what that word means, they migrate down through that inguinal canal and end up in the area of the scrotum. Okay, so we have two testes that develop in the abdomen, descend during the embryonic development, and they eventually end up in the scrotum. When they actually, a male child is born, they'll actually palpate the scrotum to make sure there's two testicles. If there's not, it means that it's still stuck somewhere up inside the canal. The reason why we have the scrotum, which is the next thing, is it allows a much more even temperature control for the testes for spermatozoid production. And so if there's not the two testes in the area of the scrotum, later on, to be able to better have control of the temperature of the testes, they'll actually go up in through the canal, find them, pull them down, and sew them to the inside of the scrotum when they get a little bit older. Not like right after birth, it's too small. A little bit later, they'll go up and get them and bring them down. And the scrotum, like I said, is between the thighs. It's a skin-like sac, but it allows a better control of temperature for the testes. The scrotum is lined on the inside with small muscles. They're called the cremaster muscles. What happens is when it's cold, these cremaster muscles will actually will tighten up, and they pull the testes up closer to the body for warmth. And when it's too warm, what they actually do is they'll relax and allow the testicles, the muscle relaxes, allows the scrotum to allow the testicles to relax and fall further away from the body to decrease the temperature. Okay, so as a result, the scrotum is really important in regards to helping to control the temperature, which assists in the maturation of spermatozoa, providing the right temperature, so we do have a good maturation of the spermatozoa, and so it aids in spermatogenesis. Okay, so now we know a little bit about the testes. We'll talk a little bit more about the testes, what happens inside them. That's important. That'll be coming up next. The perineum, like in the female, in the female was from the external genitalia back to the anus. In the male, it's the area between the anus and the scrotum. Again, you could feel a little ridge of tissue that goes from the back of the scrotum back towards the anus, and that's just where all the muscles and everything sort of come together, and that's what that is. Okay, and again, so when we're looking here, this area right here would be the area of the testes, and the scrotum would be right in here. Perineum is this area in there. Okay, so now we see where everything is. Okay, scrotum, and you can see these little wrinkles. There's little wrinkles all over those. Little wrinkles right there, little wrinkles, and all those little wrinkles are those cremaster muscles. Okay, and those are the ones that will either elevate or allow the testicles to descend. Okay, those are the cremaster muscles. Okay, now let's talk a little about the testicle. Okay, and the testicular structure. What's inside, and what we're looking at here in regards to the testicle is this area right here. This area right here. This is different over just to the left is a little bit different. So that's the testicle right here, okay? And what happens is inside the testicle are all these small little coiled tubes. You see all these little tubes there? They're all little tubes that come out this way. These are called seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules. And basically what they are, they're like a conveyor belt or an assembly line for the production of spermatozoa. So the spermatozoa are produced along these tubules, okay? And then what happens is eventually they feed along the tubule and they feed into the central area and they feed into this other area in here, which we'll talk about in just a second. Okay, so basically the testes have all these little small tubules, okay, and these little tubules, these called seminiferous tubules, all these little squiggles in here, they're all little tubules, and that's where the spermatozoa are produced. Eventually it comes to the middle and out into the next area we'll talk about in a second. Interstitial cells are basically cells that are between all these, and they are the cells that actually make the testosterone, because the testosterone is coming from the testes. Okay, again, the adrenal gland makes a small amount of testosterone, but the majority of the testosterone is made in the testes. Stroma is basically all the connective tissue that holds the testicle together, and that's about all that is. Okay, now what happens is, like I mentioned, all those little seminiferous tubules are lined up with all the spermatozoa. All the spermatozoa are produced along that. Eventually they come out into this area right out here. Okay, this area right here, it's a band that sits on the superior to the posterior side. So back in here is posterior, out in here would be anterior. Okay, and what happens, this area is called the epididymis. Okay, and the epididymis, and the epididymis basically is the area that it collects spermatozoa. So the spermatozoa that are made in these seminiferous tubules will actually get out here in the epididymis, and what they do is they actually allow the spermatozoa to mature and become more motile. Okay, so they start to become active, they get activated, and they become more mature in the epididymis. So it's like a temporary storage area for spermatozoa, and basically it's a big long coiled tubule. Okay, so when you look at it, it's a big long coiled tubule that's all back in here, and it goes from the superior pole up in here. So this would be the top, this would be the top, this would be the bottom down here. It goes from the superior pole and winds around and twists around, stuff like that, and basically that's what we see with the epididymis. Okay, the epididymis is that area of the stores and allows the spermatozoa to become mature and more motile. What happens is that once all the spermatozoa are maturing, it ends up going out a tube that goes this way, and that tube is called the vas deferens. The vas deferens or the ductus deferens. Vas or ductus both mean tube. They're both medical terms that mean tube. And this is how the spermatozoa actually leave the epididymis through this vas deferens. It's actually about 2 feet long. It's about 2 foot long tube. It's a lot longer than you would think, and it carries the spermatozoa from outside the body, or outside the abdomen, which is basically in the area of the testicle and the scrotum, up inside the abdominal cavity. Boom! You know, it doesn't deposit inside the abdominal cavity, but it carries it to a certain area inside the abdominal cavity, and I'll talk about how that happens in just a second. So it does carry the spermatozoa to the pelvic region in preparation for ejaculation, and that's the vas deferens. Okay, here you can see it a little bit. Okay, if you look right here, let me just try to see if I could draw a couple things. Let me look at here. This right here, this thing that's coming down here, I'm drawing in there, is the ureter. Okay, the ureter is in there, and what happens is that the vas deferens leaves the area of the scrotum, okay, and it goes along the anterior abdominal wall in that inguinal region, and goes through that canal, that inguinal canal, where the testes went through to go from the abdomen to the outside of the scrotum. The vas deferens comes up through that way, and that makes sense because you got to remember that what happens. I just dropped my pen. You got to remember that vas deferens, okay, that vas deferens. Let me get rid of my pen real quick. That vas deferens went with the testes as they went from inside the abdomen to out to the to the area of the scrotum. So the vas deferens is connected as it comes down that tube, so that goes with it, as well as arteries, veins, and nerves that go along that, which are wrapped up in a bundle called the spermatic cord. Okay, so what happens is now the vas deferens leaves the scrotum, goes up to the abdomen, and gets inside that outside hole, which is called the external ring. It goes up that canal, which is through the layers of muscles in the abdominal wall, and the vas deferens then gets inside the abdominal cavity. What the vas deferens, I'm going to do it with a different picture, a different color. Let's use purple here. Okay, then the vas deferens comes this way, goes around the area of the ureter, and goes to the back side of the bladder. It comes in this way, around the area of the ureter, and goes to the back side of the bladder. So it goes all the way to the opposite side of the bladder. It goes over the top of the ureter, over the top of the bladder, inside the ureters to the back side of the bladder. Okay, and at the point in the back side of the bladder, it meets with these things here, right here and here, and those are called seminal vesicles. Seminal vesicles. And what happens so that vas deferens down here meets where the seminal vesicles are, and what happens is the seminal vesicles actually make more fluid. They make more fluid. What leaves through the vas deferens is spermatozoa. That's it, not much else, spermatozoa. And what happens is that vas deferens then goes up through the abdominal wall, up over the top of the bladder, inside the ureters, to the back side of the bladder, where it meets the seminal vesicles. And the seminal vesicles say, hey, I've got a little package for you, a little bit extra fluid to add there. So it adds more fluid to the overall bulk, because what we're going to find is there's going to be a couple other places to add fluid, and the end bulk that we have is a lot more than just the bulk of the semen, but a bulk of the spermatozoa, and this larger bulk is called semen. Okay, so anyway, we get to the back side of the bladder and meet those seminal vesicles that you can see on the back side of the bladder. So you can actually see that now. I got all this, all of my drawing taken out. So the seminal vesicle, if I'm looking at it as a seminal vesicle right there, and that would be a seminal vesicle right there, adding more fluid to the overall situation. What happens is seminal vesicles then come together, okay? And down in here, they sort of come together and create what's called the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct, okay? And the ejaculatory duct basically then takes the spermatozoa plus the fluid from the seminal vesicles and mixes it and mingles it together and injects it right through what's called the prostate gland. Now the purple thing down here is the prostate gland. This area down here is the prostate, okay? That ejaculatory duct then goes through the prostate and empties into the urethra. And then where's the urethra coming from? From the bladder. And there we have that merging of the reproductive system in the male with the urinary system in the male. They actually meet together, okay? So now the seminal vesicles come together, ejaculatory duct's made, goes through the prostate, so the ejaculatory duct goes through the prostate, and it empties into the urethra, okay? Below the prostate, there's another gland called the bulbourethral gland. Guess what that does? Also makes more fluid. And that has a special duct that goes right into the urethra as well to add more fluid to the overall fluid volume, which is the semen. Okay, so there's a bunch of, don't worry about where those are because they're a little bit out of place. So let's talk a little bit more about that vas deferens. Again, it's the continuation of the epididymis. We talked about that before. It begins at the tail portion of the epididymis. The bottom portion starts at the tail epididymis on the inferior portion of the testicle and goes in the spermatic cord. And again, in that spermatic cord, I have the vas deferens, I have the artery that goes, the testicular artery that goes to the testicle, testicular veins that leave the testicle, and nerve supply that goes down through there. It goes to the thing called, like I mentioned before, called the inguinal canal, goes inside the abdominal cavity, and then crosses the external iliac vessels, which are the big vessels that supply the pelvis, okay, and then enters the pelvis itself. Goes along the lateral wall of the pelvis, inside the area of the uterus, goes to the back side of the bladder, like I mentioned, and joins with the seminal vesicles to form the ejaculatory duct. Let's see what that looks like. Here, this you can see it here. It's not really a great picture. I got another one that comes up, but you can actually see if I'm drawing a little line here. Let me just draw this with red. It's going to be easier to see. So here's the vas deferens right here, okay? Comes up and goes to that inguinal canal. As it goes to the inguinal canal, it crosses the external iliac in here and goes to, goes across the external iliac right here,
goes across, I got my pen in the wrong spot, goes across the top of the bladder, goes to the back, and joins the seminal vesicles right there. That seminal vesicles come together and form another little duct, which we see right here. That's the ejaculatory duct. If I look right here, that's the urethra. The ejaculatory duct gets into the urethra, and therefore it takes the fluid, the spermatozoa, as well as the fluid from the seminal vesicles, mixes it and puts it into the urethra right about here. Okay, so let's get rid of all that stuff. We see the direction of the vas deferens. Also below in here, there's you can barely see, it's very small on this picture. Okay, let me do it with the green down here. Right down here, there's a little thing right there. It looks like a little P-shaped thing, and that's the bulbourethral gland. It's also called Cowper gland. And what happens, that also makes fluid and secretes that into the urethra right here, because that urethra, like I said, is coming right down through the prostate. Here's the prostate right there. Urethra comes down through there to towards the end of the penis. So we get the input from the seminal vesicles, we get the input of the bulbourethral gland from below. Now this is just looking at what we're talking about again, okay? And you can see the testicles right down in here, and here's the vas deferens coming up this way. It goes through the abdominal wall. Here's the bladder right here. It goes over the top of the bladder. Here's the ureter, goes inside the ureter, goes to the back, and there's my seminal vesicle. This area right in here, is the prostate. So what happens is now the seminal vesicles will actually drain this way. That would be, the green would be the ejaculatory duct, okay? And it drains into the area of the urethra, which is right here. You can see where it drains in there. And that's basically that arrangement that we see. This is another picture that we see. You can see where the vas deferens goes up. Now this gets me down to a good point, okay? And this is called vasectomy, okay? Commonly done procedure. When I was a first-year medical student, basically, I used to work at the Planned Parenthood that used to be over by Case Western Reserve University on the Delbert. And I used to go over there on Friday nights, and Friday nights we did 3, 4, 5 vasectomies every Friday night. Lined them up and did the vasectomies there at Planned Parenthood. And basically what they do is, if you see, here's the vas deferens right here. Get out of there. Here's the vas deferens. All they do is we'd find the vas deferens, okay, inside the scrotum, sort of tie it there, cut it in the middle, so it's tied there, cut in the middle, and let it go. And then now what happens is the spermatozoa get up to here. Oops, can't get any further because now that vas deferens is tied off. There's no place to get through. And they cut out a piece, okay? They cut out the piece in there because that spermatozoa is not going to go from one, it's not going to jump to the other. It just doesn't happen that way, okay? It was actually a relatively simple procedure. It only takes a few minutes to be able to do. And basically, the procedure was, and a lot of times I'd do one side, and because I was a PA as well, and the urology resident would do the other side. And basically, all you do is you'd feel the top of the scrotum. You'd feel for where the spermatic cord was. You could feel it in the top of the scrotum, okay? And then what you do is then you'd feel inside there, and you could feel like a little wire. Feel like a little wire with like a insulation around it. You'd feel it, and you sort of roll it. And when you rolled it up to the surface of the scrotum. Then you took lidocaine, okay, and injected lidocaine between your fingers right into that area where the spermatic cord was. Okay, and what did that do? That took a little bit of area of skin right there, and it would numb it. You take a little blade, make a little slit right where that little blade was, reach inside, don't drop it, because if you drop it, you'll never find it again. You hold on to it, you reach inside, you grab the area of the spermatic cord, and you pull it out. You stick something underneath it so it doesn't drop back in. You clean it off. You take all the other material off of it. You find the vas deferens in there. You clean that off a little bit. You strip back all the tissue on one side and the other side. You clamp it on one side. You clamp it on the other side. You tie around the clamp and you cut it in the middle, or you take off a long chunk if you want to make sure that it's permanent. Okay. So basically, what you do is you call ligate. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. That was a bad thing. Okay. I don't color that with black. Let me do that with yellow. You ligate. Ligate means to tie the vas deferens, okay, or the ductus deferens, the same thing, okay, and then you cut it between, okay, and that's it. So therefore, what happens is you still have spermatozoa that are produced in the testes. You still have the testosterone production in the area from the testes, but what happens is that the spermatozoa can't get past here. Why? Because it's tied off and blocked. Okay, and that's a simple procedure. About 10 minutes. It takes longer to get it ready than it is to anything else. The urethra, like we talked about before, is the outlet tube.
okay? It's where the spermatozoa is eventually going to be ejected at the end, okay? And we know that urethra actually starts in the bladder to allow urine to be able to exit, and when it goes out, goes through the external urethral orifice, or the meatus, which I talked about, which is at the tip of the glans penis. But what that urethra does, it goes right through the middle of the prostate. The prostate surrounds it. So like I talked about before with the dihydrotestosterone, when the prostate gets big, it squeezes on that prostate, and when it squeezes on the when the prostate gets big, it squeezes on the urethra, and it squeezes the urethra almost shut, okay? And again, eventually that urethra gets the input from the ejaculatory duct, okay, which is coming from the seminal vesicles, as well as below that from the bulbourethral gland. So therefore, the urethra conveys both urine and semen, okay, not at the same time, but urine and semen, okay? And again, that's what we talked about here. Again, we can see here's the area of the prostate right in here. Let me do it in red. There's the area of the prostate right in there. You can see how the urethra is coming out of the bladder down this way, and you can see here's the seminal vesicles, and here's the ejaculatory duct right back there. Puts the material, the fluid from the ejaculatory duct, as well as the spermatozoa, into the urethra, comes down this way. Bulbourethral gland ends more down here, and is eventually ejaculated out through the end of the penis. Okay, so we see there. Okay. The seminal vesicles, again, sit on the back side of the bladder, okay? They don't store sperm, but what happens, they do create that, it's a very thicker alkaline fluid that works well with the spermatozoa. It mixes with the spermatozoa and adds more volume, okay? And that then with the spermatozoa and with the seminal vesicles, the fluid gets together and goes down that ejaculatory duct into the area of the urethra, just like we talked about before, okay? And again, that's what we saw here. So here would be the seminal vesicles. There's the ejaculatory duct going through the prostate. Okay, that's a bad picture, that won't show. This is a little bit better picture. You can actually see it a little bit better. Okay, we can see this ejaculatory duct back in here. Again, this is the area right in here where I'm doing blue, is the seminal vesicles. And so here's the vas deferens right here, coming in over the top of the bladder to seminal vesicles. And then at that point, what happens is this area right in here. Let me do a different color. Let's do it yellow here. Maybe do it white. Let's see if white shows up. It doesn't. Anyway, this area right here would be the area. You can see it as that little curved area. Let me try to do it with a different, let's do it this way. There you go. That would be the area of the ejaculatory duct going from the seminal vesicle. It goes into the urethra right there. The urethra is coming down there. Here, down here, that area right there is that bulbourethral gland, which also is a duct that goes into the urethra. Okay, so that's the ejaculatory duct, goes right through the prostate from posterior to the anterior and enters into the urethra right down in there. Okay, that's what that is. And here's the prostate. Now the prostate is about walnut sized, okay, and it surrounds that prostatic urethra. So what happens is this would be the bladder. If I look up in here, this area in here would be where the bladder would be. You can actually see that opening of the urethra here, and right in the middle of that is where the area of the ejaculatory duct would enter into the area of the urethra as it goes through. So the urethra is now going out this way, okay, out towards the penis, but this area in the middle would be where the ejaculatory duct meets the urethra. Okay, so we know that what happens is that prostate surrounds the prostatic, what's called the prostatic urethra, which is basically the part of the urethra that goes through there. Okay, it has, and all I think you need to remember about this, it has a capsule around the outside of it, so it's held by a sheath around the outside. One of the things that's done, and you could look at the base. The base is the top, so the area up in here would be the base. This area down here would be the apex, and that's basically all you need to know about the prostate. There are different lobes, anterior, posterior lobes, and I don't think you have to worry about that. This purple thing right here would be the prostate, and there would be the prostatic urethra right in the middle. That's right there, and we know that somewhere in the middle of that, right in this area is where the area of, it's not doing it. Okay, let's do it again. Right in this area, it's not. I don't know what's going on. This area is right where we'd see the ejaculatory duct go in. Okay, so that's a little about that. Again, a couple of the things that are important about this is as guys get older, again, I talked about how that reductase enzyme converts testosterone, pure testosterone, to dihydrotestosterone, and it sort of binds to receptors on the prostate that makes the prostate bigger.
what's called benign prostatic hypertrophy or benign prostatic hyperplasia. And the cells get bigger and the prostate gets bigger. And what happens, it starts to squeeze down on the urethra, which makes urination much more difficult. A couple things that happen is these people, males that have, a problem with with his BPH, they frequently have nocturia. Nocturia means that they have to get up in the middle of the night multiple times to pass their urine. And the reason why is if the output, if the urethra is narrowed, then what happens is when the guys go, they just don't urinate all the way. They still leave too much urine in the bladder, so therefore it gets filled to where they get that sensation that have to go a lot sooner. If you don't empty the whole bladder and you leave a lot more what's called residual urine inside the bladder, it just sort of it's easier to get to a point where you have to go again. They also have dysuria, sometimes discomfort, as well as urgency. Urgency is because the bladder seems like it's always full, and the reason why it's always full is because it's incomplete voiding. They're not voiding all out. As a result, there's an increased risk of bladder infection, and that makes sense. What happens is the bladder is open to the outside. Why? Through the urethra. The urethra goes to the outside. So that means any bacteria in the outside could actually go up the urethra. Things like a gonococcus involves the urethritis or an infection of the urethra. So there's a certain, it's called a protozoan, which is called trichomonas. Trichomonas is a little protozoan, looks like a little white blood cell with a little flagella on it that swims around, and it's also a sexually transmitted disease. And what happens is these protozoans will actually swim up the area of the urethra and they get in the bladder. Well, what happens is the bladder does what? It stores urine. And what does the urine do? It's mostly water. And what happens is when you urinate, you clean out and you wash out the bladder. You eliminate all that stuff. So what happens is, though, and that's why what happens when somebody has a cystitis or a bladder infection, just by forcing fluids and things like that and increasing the amount of urinary output, frequently cleans out a lot of the bladder from the bacteria. The problem is the bacteria, if they work up the ureters and get in the kidneys, that becomes a problem. But what happens is if a male has this prostatitis or benign prostatic hyperplasia, it's more difficult to empty, so there's more residual urine. What happens to residual urine? The bacteria say, well, I ain't going anywhere. The urine's not going anywhere. I'm going to stick. So as a result, now that urine stays there, and there's an increased risk of bladder infection in males because of that prostatic hyperplasia. Okay, so that becomes a significant problem sometimes in males with benign prostatic hyperplasia. Okay. And one of the things that we sometimes see, okay, besides that is one of the things is one of the things that guys have on their examination, if you didn't talk to an older male or anything about this, but one of the things that happens always on an older male exam is they always do what's called a DRE. It's called a DRE. And DRE stands for digital rectal exam. And this is actually short. I mean, the finger has to be a lot longer than this. It usually takes all the way the whole index finger, but actually you could feel the prostate through the rectum. It'll be on the anterior wall because the prostate is going to be sitting down in this area right here. So by inserting your finger in the rectum, you're able to feel the prostate at the very end. You could feel how large it is, as well as if there's any lumps or bumps, which might be reflective of prostate cancer. They could actually feel those things by a digital rectal examination. It's an exceptionally common exam done on older males, okay? Digital rectal exam. So you can actually feel the prostate. If we were at the school, I'd be able to I have models in the back cabinet in the one room that actually I could get out that you actually feel what it feels like. It feels like a dense rubber ball, okay? Firm like a firm rubber ball. It's mildly compressible, but if you feel something like stones or rocks in it, it's much more likely to be something like a cancer, okay? Prostate cancer. I should mention about prostate cancer. I think we skipped over it a little bit. Prostate cancer is exceptionally common in males, and basically it's a slow-growing cancer for the most part in most males. So what happens? It usually takes a long time, a number of years, to go from not a problem to a lot of problem. Okay, so a lot of times they actually say to guys, if they have less than 10 years of life expectancy, they say, hey, have a good life. Don't enjoy what you do, what you got, because you'll probably die of something else before you die of the prostate cancer. Although in younger males, then what they do is they do a prostatectomy and they'll remove all that stuff. Let's go to the bulbourethral glands. In the bulbourethral glands, we actually see they're sitting right in here. That's the bulbourethral gland. You can see how it has a little duct that empties into the prostate right there. What does that bulbourethral gland do? It makes more fluid to be able to add to that overall thing, which is called semen. Okay, semen is basically, you know, the spermatozoa plus all the fluids, plus fluids from the seminal vesicles. The prostate also produces fluid, and fluid then also from the bulbourethral gland, and that results in the semen. Okay, all those things together result in the semen. So that's called the bulbourethral gland. It's also called Cowper gland, C-O-W-P-E-R. It's a P. Okay. And there's two pea-sized Cowper glands, okay, and they open into the proximal portion of the urethra, just proximal to the penis at that point, and they do create a mucus-like secretion that becomes more active during sexual arousal to add more fluid to the overall semen that we talked about before, and that's called the bulbourethral gland. Okay, so this is pretty much a summary of what we've talked about with the male reproductive system. You know, penis is basically there not just for urination, but also for the emission of spermatozoa or semen. Okay, the testes are where the spermatozoa are made in these seminiferous tubules inside the testes, and they're produced by the millions. Okay, not just by a couple here, a couple there, but they're produced by the millions. What happens is they're stored for a while in the epididymis, which is that coiled tube on the superior and posterior side of the testes. And what happens eventually when they're needed, they actually migrate up through that vas deferens, which is that long tube that goes from the inferior pole of the penis at the bottom of the epididymis, up through the abdominal wall, over the top of the bladder, to the back of the bladder, to the seminiferous, to the seminal vesicles. Seminal vesicles add more fluid to the overall semen volume. Okay, and then what happens is seminal vesicles merge. They come into what's called the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct goes through another organ called the prostate. Prostate's right at the bottom of the bladder and around the urethra. And what happens, the prostate also makes some fluid. They actually think that sometimes the prostate might actually have some antibacterial activity as well. Another thing about the prostate, which I think is really interesting, is the prostate also has smooth muscles in the wall of the prostate. And what happens is, to be able to perform that ejaculation, there has to be something that will propel that semen. And what happens, the prostate will actually go through rhythmic contractions, squeeze, 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 to actually start to force that ejaculate out the end of the penis. So the prostate does that as well. When they do prostate surgery, they avoid, if they can, going in and taking the prostate out from the outside, because what it does is it first of all messes everything up. There's a lot of nerves down there that result in things like incontinence. Incontinence means dribbling. They'll have urinary dribbling, as well as sometimes a problem with erection and ejaculation, because all the nerves there are compromised. Okay, so anyway, so the prostate is important only in males, not in females at all. It gets big, and a lot of times if the prostate is just big and no cancer, they can actually take a tube and put the tube right up the urethra and scrape out the prostate from the inside, which is called a TURP, transurethral resection of the prostate. Trans T, urethral U, resection R of the prostate P. Okay, and they could actually scrape it out from the inside. Okay, and then they leave a stent in there, which is basically a catheter, let the fibrous tissue grow around, and eventually they'll pull that stent out over a period of time. Then what happens is, we know that the seminal vesicles with the ejaculatory duct go through the prostate, and the prostate, that ejaculatory duct meets with the urethra coming from the bladder with all the semen that's there. Bulbourethral glands also feed into the urethra to come out, and basically that's what happens. Again, we know physiologically that the testicle is basically the location where testosterone is produced, and when in individuals that years ago, what happens was they had, if you ever heard the term eunuch, eunuch means what they've done is they've castrated. Castration means removing the testicles. If the testicles are removed, number one, they can no longer produce spermatozoa, because the only place spermatozoa are made in the testicles. So if they remove that, testicles no longer spermatozoa. Also, the vast majority of the testosterone is produced in the testicle, a little bit in the adrenal, but mostly in the testicle. So therefore, it's devirilizing or demasculinizing. It decreases muscle mass, hair patterns are a little bit different, increased development of breast tissue and stuff like that may occur, you know, in people who are with castration or eunuchs, okay? Which sometimes they've even talked about with criminals who have been sexual predators, actually either doing castration, which then they didn't like simply because it was a surgical procedure to do something and they thought it was a violation, or medical, by certain medications will actually cause a decreased sexual urge and spermatozoa production, and they could actually do that by reducing the testicular function, okay, which is something that they do also with people who are transgender and moving from one gender to the other. They actually decrease the testicular function by doing that as well. So anyway, that's a little bit about the male reproductive system. Hopefully that fills you in with everything you need to know, and in the meantime, keep on learning, stay smart, and be healthy. Okay, we'll talk to you.